My son didn't just tell me I wasn't invited for Christmas. He said it like a hotel manager, informing a guest their card had been declined. I smiled, stood up from his imported linen sofa, and kept my voice level. I could do my famous turkey. This year, I said, sinking back for a beat like we were still the same family who roasted together and argued about football. With the sage stuffing your mother used to love. Remember how Lucia always said mine beat her abuelas? The words drifted into the expensive stillness of their living room, curling with the scent of Sabrina's vanilla sandalwood candle collection. Across from me, Daniel, my Daniel, shifted. His wedding band flashed under the glow of a 12-foot tree that scraped the tray ceiling, his shoulders cinched like he was bracing for a punch. Dad, you won't be welcome here for Christmas. It hit like a body shot. Not dramatic, just deep and efficient. I blinked, sure I'd misheard him. What do you mean? Not welcome? He studied the marble coffee table. I recognized it. I'd helped him pick it out last spring when Sabrina declared their first set lacked cohesion. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Sabrina's parents are coming, he said, and they'd prefer if you weren't here. They'd prefer. The phrase was a match, struck and snuffed, then tossed into a closet full of dry kindling. It's just easier this way, Dad, he added quickly. So you know how the Whitmores are with traditions. They have their ways. My gaze moved through the open-plan cathedral they called a home, cascading silk drapes I'd paid for when Sabrina decided privacy was part of her nervous system. Health? The wide plank oak floors that came out of my second mortgage, crown molding that lived on my credit card for 14 months. Every corner of the house wore my fingerprints, my labor, my love. Their way, I repeated. And what way is that, Daniel? He flinched. Dad, please don't make this harder. Through the arch into the kitchen, I could see Sabrina's industrial KitchenAid mixer, the professional model she'd insisted on during her holiday breads era, which lasted as eras do in that house, just under 3 weeks. $2,000 of my money shining on a spotless counter, mostly decorative since October. Where should I spend Christmas then? My voice came out softer than I intended. Daniel's face fell. Maybe Aunt Marisa? Or we could do something the weekend after. The weekend after. Like Christmas was just another slot on a calendar, reschedulable, interchangeable, emotionally refundable. I stood. My knees, 62 years old and acquainted with ladders, reminded me who they were. I see. Dad. Wait, but I was already moving past the hall gallery where my face shrank in every new frame, swallowed by staged moments that looked like magazine adverts for strangers. Past a closet packed with Sabrina's coats that cost more than my truck. My palm found the doorknob, solid, cold. Tell the Whitmores something for me, I said without turning. Feliz Navidad. The December air in Albuquerque bit clean and bright when I stepped onto the porch. Behind me, Daniel's voice called my name once. The door clicked shut, final, simple. I sat in my pickup and didn't start it. I watched the neighborhood sparkle, warm windows, synchronized lights, other people's welcome. My phone buzzed. Probably Daniel, rehearsing an apology written in the language of good intentions and weak backs. I let it go. When I finally turned the key, the engine's growl matched the sound in my chest. I rolled down Tramway Boulevard with the heater fighting, the desert-cold Sandia Heights glittering on my right. Every intersection had a ghost of the man I used to be, the one who believed family was always worth one more sacrifice. That man was generous. That man was a fool. At a red light on Paseo in Wyoming, I watched a young dad load wrapped boxes into the back of a mid-size SUV. 2 kids fogged the glass from inside, faces pressed against it like penguins at the zoo. Years ago, that had been Daniel and me, before Sabrina. Before I learned that in some families, a father becomes a debit card with inconvenient feelings. Numbers started spinning like a broken slot machine. 2,850 every month automatic transfer. 5 years. My calculator had quit on me in April when I tried to total it. I did it by hand anyway. $171,000. Add the down payment. Add the kitchen. Add the furniture. Add the essential landscaping so the HOA stopped sending letters that somehow always found their way to me first. More than Lucia and I had in our retirement. vaporized, to maintain an image I wasn't allowed to sit next to at dinner. Green light. I pressed the pedal harder than necessary. Academy Road. That's where I'd refinanced the house Lucia and I built, a tidy stucco with a stubborn bougainvillea to cover their down payment. I remembered the loan officer's careful face. "Mr. Vega, are you certain? You're putting a lot at risk for someone else's investment." Someone else's investment. Not my son. Someone else. Montgomery. The bank where I took a second mortgage when Daniel temporarily lost his job. "Just until I'm back on my feet, Dad." Sabrina stood behind him with a $700 handbag, nodding like she understood grit. Funny how people who understand grit don't own a mop. I turned onto my cracked driveway. I hadn't fixed the concrete, because every spare dollar flowed downhill toward their cul-de-sac. The porch light flickered in mild protest. One more thing I'd get to next month. The house felt too quiet inside. No Lucia humming in the kitchen, no cousins arguing about Chile's versus no Chile's, no soccer match murmuring from the living room. Just the echo of an absence that never learned to whisper. My phone rang while I fumbled with the keys. Sabrina's name lit the screen like a hazard light. Perfect. I let it ring 4 times. Picked up on the 5th. Let her feel a taste of uncertainty. "Hector," she said, syrup over a knife, "I heard there was a little misunderstanding with Daniel." "Misunderstanding?" I stayed standing by the counter, coat still on. "I don't think so." "You have to understand my parents' perspective," she said. "They're very traditional. They expect a certain atmosphere during the holidays." "A certain atmosphere," I echoed. "And what atmosphere is that?" On her end, paper bags rustled, the sound of purchases that were never her problem. "They're not used to your kind of cooking, all that spicy food and loud music. And to be frank, Hector, they're educated people. They like conversations about current events, literature, art, you know." The strike found the tender spot and kept going. "My kind of cooking," I said evenly. "You mean the pozole you asked me to make every Sunday the year Daniel was unemployed? The tamales you told me tasted like home?" That was different. We were appreciative then. But now, with my parents, "Now that the Whitmores are flying in," I said. "You can't have a construction guy with rough hands embarrassing you at your table." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped, the sugar boiling off. "This isn't about race, it's about class. My father graduated summa cum laude from Stanford. My mother speaks 4 languages. They summer in Cape Cod. What would you contribute, Hector? Stories about laying tile?" Heat climbed my neck, then cooled just as fast. "I built a company from nothing after my wife died. I employ 37 people. So I've paid more in taxes than your father earned in his best year." "Money isn't everything," she said. "Breeding matters. Education matters. Lucia understood her place better than you do." Silence. She'd stepped somewhere people don't return from easily. "What did you say about my wife?" I asked. "I'm saying she knew how to blend," Sabrina said. "She didn't make waves. She understood some spaces weren't meant for her." My hand whitened around the phone. "Lucia had more grace in her smallest finger than your entire bloodline can rent for a night." "Oh, please," she said. "She cleaned houses. She got lucky." "Sabrina," I said, my voice turning into something I recognized and hadn't heard in a long time, "listen carefully. We're done pretending to be family. You can't just—" "We're done." I hung up, set the phone down gently. The room changed temperature, not warmer exactly, just cleaner. I pulled a manila folder from the desk cubby I used to ignore because I thought love was supposed to be bottomless. Bank statements. Mortgage papers. 5 years of automatic transfers that bled me out while they staged still life photos of a life I bought for them. Time to stop the bleeding. I spread everything on the kitchen table like evidence before a jury. $2,850 on the 15th of every month. Highlighted notes in Lucia's old yellow marker, the one she used for grocery lists. Year 1, $34,200. Year 2, another $34,200. By year 3, I'd stopped buying new work boots. Year 4, I learned which discount store had the decent canned tomatoes. Year 5, lunch became peanut butter because pride can be spread thin if you're careful. $171,000, not including the $49,000 down payment. not including just this one-time utilities, not including Sabrina's "we need a roof before monsoon season" emergency, not including the furniture I never sat on and the kitchen that didn't smell like onions once. I picked up the phone. "Thank you for calling Olive Ridge Credit Union," a recording chirped. "Para español oprima el número dos." I pressed 1. "Customer service, this is Alina. How can I help you today?" "I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to a man who had finally put both feet on the floor. "Absolutely, sir. I'll just need your account number and verification." I recited numbers I could do in my sleep. She typed, "I see the transfer, Mr. Vega. $2,850 monthly to SunWest Mortgage. Account ending 1196. It's been active for 5 years. "That's right," I said, "and you want it cancelled effective immediately." I looked around my small, honest kitchen, at the old fridge that hummed too loud, at the window that needed caulking, at the prayer candle on the stove Lucia used to light when things got hard. "Effective immediately," I said. There was a tap, tap, tap of keys. "Done. The transfer is cancelled. Anything else I can do for you?" "No," I said, and the word tasted shockingly good. "That's everything." I ended the call and just stood there, listening to the house breathe. The sun was lowering behind the Sandias, painting the sky violet like it sometimes does when New Mexico decides to show off. For the first time in 5 years, next month's budget would make sense. I could buy actual groceries, fix the porch light, maybe take a weekend trip to Taos and sit by a fire without calculating whether firewood was a luxury. I stacked the statements. I carried them to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched the edges curl. 5 years of martyrdom turned to ash in a clean, steady flame. The heat on my face was the kind of warmth you earn. My phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't check it. I opened the good bottle of bourbon, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion. Tonight qualified. I lifted the glass toward the photo of Lucia on the mantel. "Merry Christmas to me," I said, and meant it. Morning came bright and sharp, the kind of December Albuquerque morning where the sun looks like a jewel and every breath feels scrubbed clean. I brewed a second cup of coffee without calculating whether I needed to save the good beans. Freedom tastes a little like citrus when the bitterness lifts off your tongue. At exactly 10:43 a.m., my phone lit up with Sabrina's name. I let it ring twice, respectable pause, then answered. "Hector," she said, clipped and purposeful like a project manager assigning tasks. "I need you to pick up my parents from the Sunport. Their Southwest flight gets in at 2. Baggage claim B, don't be late." I placed my mug down carefully, watched the steam curl like handwriting. "Did you forget our conversation yesterday?" "Whatever drama that was, we're focusing on practicalities now," she replied. "You're the only one with daytime availability. That truck of yours can handle their luggage, and wear the blue shirt you had on at Daniel's MBA graduation. They notice things." The audacity washed over me, cold and clarifying. 20 hours after telling me I wasn't fit company for their holiday table, she had me slotted as airport shuttle. "Family, when it wants a service, remembers your number." "What airline?" I asked, voice smooth as tile. "Southwest, 2789 from Phoenix," she said. "They'll be outside by the center pillars. My father doesn't like to wait." "Of course," I said. "So I'll take care of it." "Good," she said, and the line went dead. "No, please, no thank you, not even the pretend kind." I checked the clock, 10:45, plenty of time. I poured more coffee. Did the crossword in the paper without cheating. A small miracle. 11 across. Paid pain today for comfort tomorrow. 12 letters. Deferred something. The answer would arrive when it wanted. At 2:15 p.m., I settled into my favorite chair with Earl Grey and the Sunday edition I'd saved. The crossword from yesterday lay finished on the table. Deferred something had been postponement. The sun came in through the blinds and warmed my forearms. My phone buzzed on the wood. Sabrina, I let it ring. At 2:47, a text preview jumped across the screen. "Dad, where are you?" "My parents are—" I flipped the phone face down and moved to the sports page. The Lobos had blown a fourth-quarter lead. Some patterns hold steady even when you change everything else. By 3:30, the phone had buzzed 6 times. I emptied the dishwasher, sorted the junk drawer that had been a magnetic poem of batteries and rubber bands since Lucia. Funny how much you can accomplish when you're not sprinting to meet someone else's emergency. At 3:45, a new number called likely her parents borrowing a stranger's phone or a rental desk. I let it ring until voicemail grabbed it by the collar. Outside, my neighbor strung a modest loop of lights over his porch, while his 2 kids fought cheerfully about who got to plug them in. Normal life looked good on other people. It started to look possible on me. At 4:12, the rhythm changed from calling to pounding. Not at the phone, at my door. Not a knock. The kind of heavy-handed pounding that tries to bruise wood. I set down my tea. Walked to the door at a pace that would never be accused of hurrying. Through the peephole, 3 figures crowded my porch like a committee. I opened it halfway. "Hector," boomed a tanned man with a square jaw that had been fed a steady diet of winning. "What the hell is wrong with you?" He shouldered through without waiting for entry, trailing expensive cologne sharp as pepper spray. Behind him swept a woman perfectly coiffed except for the way fury had disturbed the alignment, lips drawn thin like a signature on a threatening letter. Sabrina wrapped up the trio, eyes narrowed, makeup smudged just enough to suggest real weather had touched her. "You left us at the airport for 3 hours, the man barked, turning on me like I was already on a witness stand. "Good afternoon to you too," I said, stepping back no farther than necessary. "This is unacceptable," the woman snapped. "At our age, in this weather, 60 degrees and sunny?" I asked. "Yes, treacherous," Sabrina pointed a manicured finger. "You humiliated us." I kept my voice easily conversational. "All of you need to leave my house." The man's neck darkened. "I'm Charles Whitmore," he said, "and you don't talk to Catherine that way. We waited because you committed to pick us up. In a house I'm uninvited to for Christmas," I said, "after 5 years of subsidizing the life you're here to admire. Do not mistake me for a man who can be barked at in his living room. Out." Catherine's tone shifted to that polished register people use to lecture service workers. "How you clearly don't understand the social implications, Mr. Vega. My husband sits on the board of—" "This is a lesson for you," I said softly, and it had the same effect as a shout. "About treating people you think outrank you, about how little room you leave for dignity when you decorate your table with condescension." Sabrina's mouth opened, closed. "A lesson," she scoffed. "You're nobody. I'm the person who stopped being your bank and your driver in the same 24 hours, I said, and opened the door wider toward the driveway. "Lesson concludes at the curb." Charles stepped closer, finger aimed at my chest but careful not to touch. "You have no idea who you're crossing. We have friends in this city, people who can make your life complicated." "Is that a threat, Mr. Whitmore?" "It's a preview." Catherine's smile was porcelain with a crack. "Actions have consequences, Hector. Yours will be public." Sabrina tugged his sleeve. "Dad, come on. He's loving this." To me, "You'll regret it." "Possibly," I said. "But not tonight." They left in a gust of designer fabric and offended air. The deadbolt slid home with a clean click. My house exhaled. I picked up my tea. Still warm. Concern fluttered around the edges like a moth. Not fear, just awareness that rich people with bruised pride don't go home and journal about it. They rally, they call, they plant. 3 mornings later, I poured coffee and unfolded the Albuquerque Journal to find my face staring at me from the A section, page 3. The headline, "Local contractor abandons visiting couple at Sunport amid holiday travel strain." They'd used my company headshot from a few years back. I looked older now, maybe stronger. The article said Charles and Catherine Whitmore, visiting their daughter for the holidays, were left to fend for themselves during unpredictable holiday delays when family member Hector Vega failed to arrive for a pre-arranged pickup. They'd waited in the cold on 58 Clear, forced to take an expensive taxi. A quote from Charles about how at our age such negligence could have had serious health consequences. The piece then drifted toward insinuation. Neighbors concerned about Mr. Vega's temper, reports of erratic decisions, the telltale vague phrases of a smear built by people who pay for good brunches. Byline, Paige Ellison, lifestyleandsociety.clever. Lifestyle page readers are the audience Sabrina cares about. Place the story where the pearls live. I set the paper down and read it again. Then a third time. Respect where it's due. It was well placed, fast, and designed to do maximum reputational damage while sounding genteel. I felt the first gentle click of something I hadn't used in a long time. Strategy teeth finding purchase. All right, I thought. If you want to play in public, We'll play where people can see the whole board. I opened my laptop. Typed Charles Whitmore Albuquerque board. Results unfurled like ribbon. Country club. 2 non-profits. A business association with a pompous name and a quarterly luncheon where people clap for each other's good deeds. Catherine's Instagram led with charity galas, wine tastings in Santa Fe, and a carousel of blessed life captions posted on dates that corresponded perfectly with months I covered their water bill. Sabrina's Facebook was a showroom. Our beautiful home. Our new kitchen. Our hosting. Check-ins at restaurants that cost a day's wages. Hashtags like "Khan grateful" and "John hard work pays off," layered over tile I bought and granite I funded. Daniel's LinkedIn, though, that one made me pause. In his recent activity, a new connection. Paige Ellison, same name as the byline. Lifestyle and Society. I clicked Paige's profile. UNM journalism. A decade at local magazines recently poached by the Journal. Mutual connections with 2 business association board members, one of whom had holiday photos from a Whitmore cocktail party. The pipeline wasn't subtle if you knew what to look for. Amateurs think influence is invisible. Pros know it leaves fingerprints. I opened a fresh document and started assembling what I should have assembled years ago. A clean, patient timeline. 5 years of transfers with dates and amounts. The $49,000 down payment pulled from my home equity. The $18,600 kitchen renovation. Receipts with Sabrina's signature next to my card. 60 monthly mortgage payments at $2,850, highlighted in yellow like caution tape. Copies of texts. Could you cover gas and electric this month? We're hosting. Photos downloaded from their feeds. Time stamped and tagged in the same months I was cutting peanut butter sandwiches diagonally, and telling myself dignity still tasted like a choice. I printed everything, slid each year into its own tabbed sleeve. Added one more document to the front. Today's article annotated in red ink. Cold weather circled with the day's temperature written beside it. Erratic decisions footnoted with 5 years of steady payments. Abandoned, underlined with after disinviting me from Christmas because my presence didn't fit the atmosphere. When I finally looked up, the sun had shifted to the other side of the house. The air hummed with that quiet that only shows up when you're moving in the right direction. On my wall calendar, December 24th had a small blue dot, Lucia's habit for feast days. I drew a neat red circle around it for a different reason. Sabrina had created a Facebook event for Whitmore Fernandez. Christmas dinner. 12 guests. The guest list read like a directory of people who read the lifestyle section first. If the smear went to their circle, the truth would too. Not with yelling. Not with scenes. With documents. With facts. With the kind of story even pearl wearers understand, who paid for the table where they're eating. I pressed my suit. The navy one. Lucia's funeral suit. Some garments learn different meanings when you wear them to draw lines instead of endure losses. Christmas Eve, I loaded a leather portfolio with 12 identical packets, parked on the opposite curb in Kendall Yards as dusk fell, and the houses glowed warm as postcards. Through the big front window I saw motion, Sabrina moving like a hostess on a cooking show, Daniel in a collared shirt he used to borrow from me, Catherine sipping something pale, Charles carving authority with hand gestures. The front door was, of course, unlocked. Safety in neighborhoods like theirs doubles as theater. I stepped into warmth and laughter that stopped mid-sentence when I reached the dining room doorway. 12 heads turned. Sabrina's wine glass halted near her lips. Daniel went pale. The Whitmores looked like they'd just seen the ghost of a man they'd tried to write out. "Good evening," I said, voice even. I placed the portfolio on their marble sideboard, the same slab of stone I'd made payments on while skipping boots. "I brought something for your guests. A little Christmas transparency. You could have heard a spoon drop into the mashed potatoes." Sabrina stood, face drained of color, but still clutching the stem of her glass like a weapon. "Hector," she began, her voice wobbling just enough to reveal the panic beneath the polish. "This is highly inappropriate. You need to leave now." I smiled mildly, opening the portfolio. "Actually, I think your guests deserve to understand what makes this Christmas dinner possible." I pulled out the first stack of papers and began placing them around the table one by one. 12 neatly clipped packets, the result of 5 years of servitude disguised as generosity. Each packet contained my highlighted transfers, receipts, to even screenshots of Sabrina's Blessed Life posts that matched each withdrawal date like clockwork. A murmur rippled through the room. Forks hesitated halfway to mouths. Someone coughed. 5 years, I said conversationally. $2,850 every month to cover your mortgage. Another $49,000 for your down payment. $18,600 for that lovely kitchen. In total, give or take, $237,000. Merry Christmas. A silver-haired woman at the far end looked down at the documents, lips parting slightly. Is this true, Sabrina? Sabrina laughed, high and brittle. Of course not. He offered to help. We never asked him to do anything. Offered, I asked. Or maybe you remember begging when the first mortgage payment bounced and the bank started calling me. Or that night Daniel showed up at my door in tears because your credit cards were maxed and Daniel's eyes darted from me to his wife. Dad, please, not like this. Like what? I asked, still calm. With evidence? I turned back to the table. You see, they've been living well, really well, on someone else's back. Then, when I finally said enough, I became the villain in this. I held up a folded copy of the Albuquerque Journal, the page with my face printed above Charles Whitmore's quote about elderly neglect. The same family that excluded me from dinner suddenly decided I was a danger to polite society. Recognition flashed in several guests' eyes. Of course they'd read it. That's exactly who the article was written for. The same upper-middle-class circle of donors and board members gathered in that very dining room. Charles here, I said, nodding toward the man whose jaw was now tight as rebar, used his connections to plant that story, painted himself as the helpless victim of a cruel old contractor who left him stranded in freezing weather. 58 degrees. By the way, sunny. You can check the weather archive for December 21st. The gray-haired man beside him, one of his business association friends, judging by the watch, frowned. Charles, is that true? Charles cleared his throat. I don't owe anyone here an explanation. Then I'll give one, I said. The truth is, I was told not to come to Christmas dinner because I didn't fit the atmosphere, because my food was too spicy, my music too loud, my background too working class. I took my time meeting each pair of eyes around that table. 5 years of payments, and suddenly I'm not good enough to sit at the table I paid for. Catherine tried to recover the rhythm of command. Mr. Vega, this is unbecoming. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassment, I said softly, is a temporary feeling. Exploitation, however, that leaves scars. I walked behind Sabrina's chair and placed a copy of the newspaper article beside her plate. Would you like to explain why the byline belongs to a reporter your husband added on LinkedIn the day before it ran? Or why the photo was pulled from my company website without permission? Her fingers trembled as she reached for the page. You went through our social media. No, Sabrina. I went through my financial records. Yours just happened to be attached. A blonde woman near the head of the table, clearly one of Catherine's charity luncheon companions, lifted a sheet delicately, scanning it. This says he paid for your renovation. The appliances. The patio furniture? Sabrina's voice sharpened. We were family. He wanted to help. Wanted. I said, or was told it was his duty. Because that's what you said every time I tried to stop. Family helps family. Only that sentiment seems to apply one direction. Catherine looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. This is absurd. We have our own means, really? I said, tapping one of the receipts. Then why was your daughter using my credit card for granite countertops? The room went utterly still except for the faint ticking of their wall clock. Enough, Charles said, his voice a bark. You come into my daughter's home. It's technically still the bank's home, I said. Or it was until 3 missed payments ago. Charles froze. The color drained from his face. Oh yes, I continued. I cancelled the automatic transfer. So now those lovely overdue notices you've been pretending not to see. They're going to keep coming to you. Not to me, someone gasped. The silver-haired woman shook her head. This is appalling, she whispered. You let this man bankroll you for years, then slandered him publicly. It's more complicated, Sabrina tried again. No, I said. It's exactly as simple as it looks. Daniel stood abruptly. Dad, please, sit down, son, I said quietly. You can't fix this part. Across the table, the facade began to crumble in slow motion. guests glancing at one another, uncomfortable in their own borrowed grace. The Whitmore's empire of respectability was evaporating like frost in the sun. Catherine's charity friend broke the silence first. "I think we should leave," she said to her husband. "I'm not hungry anymore." Another couple stood. Then another. Within minutes, the room was a slow exodus of murmurs and shaking heads, people clutching their coats like shields. Only the family remained, Sabrina, Daniel, Charles, and Catherine, standing amid the ruins of a perfect dinner party. "Congratulations," Catherine hissed. "You've ruined our evening." "Oh no," I said, picking up my empty portfolio. "You ruined your own. I just provided documentation." I turned to Daniel, who looked 20 years older than he had 2 hours ago. "Son," I said gently, "when you tell someone they're not welcome, don't expect them to keep paying the entry fee." Then I walked to the door, paused just long enough to take in the glowing Christmas tree, ornaments glinting on branches I'd bought, and added quietly, "Enjoy the house while you can." Outside, the cold air tasted clean. The hum of party noise faded behind me, replaced by the slow rhythm of my own breathing. For the first time in years, it didn't sound like debt. The new year came without ceremony. No fireworks, no champagne, just silence, and the quiet relief of bills that balanced for the first time since Lucia's funeral. By March, the envelope arrived, official and heavy, with the words "Notice of Default" printed in bold. 3 months of missed payments had done what pride couldn't, broken the illusion. 1,550 in arrears. 14 days to cure the debt or face foreclosure. I signed for it on my porch, then set it on the kitchen table and went back to my coffee. The phone had been buzzing for weeks, voicemails that swung between tearful and furious. From Sabrina first, then Catherine, then Daniel. By the 3rd week, I'd blocked 2 of them. Catherine's friends in high places had vanished faster than sugar in hot tea after that dinner. The Whitmores weren't showing up in society columns anymore. The country club's sabbatical notice confirmed what I already knew. Reputation was a house of cards, and I'd only flicked one corner. Daniel held out longer, pride keeping him quiet. Until that Thursday evening when the inevitable knock came. When I opened the door, my son stood there looking smaller, thinner. The fight drained out of him. His suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and his eyes, once confident, calculating, were red-rimmed and tired. "Dad," he said softly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, motioning him in. He looked around my home, fresh paint, repaired fixtures, the new recliner I'd bought in cash, and hesitated. "It looks good in here." "It's what happens," I said, "when you spend money on yourself instead of people who don't appreciate it." He sat gingerly on the couch. "Dad, I owe you an apology. That's a start." "I didn't know about the newspaper," he said quickly. "About my father-in-law planting the story. When I found out," he exhaled shakily, "the things they said about you. About Mom, about how she knew her place. I should have defended you." "Years ago?" "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." Silence spread between us, deep and honest. Outside, the neighbors' kids were riding bikes in the fading light, their laughter spilling into the quiet. "The house," Daniel finally said, voice cracking. "It's in foreclosure. We can't make the payments without—" He stopped, realizing the sentence he'd almost finished. "Without your help." I leaned back, folding my arms. "Then I guess you'll lose it." He stared at me, stunned. "Dad, please." "I'm begging you." "We'll lose everything." "No," I said evenly. "You'll lose the house. You've already lost everything that mattered." Tears welled in his eyes. "I lost you, didn't I? I chose them over you. I studied him. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd tried to rescue from himself. You didn't lose me," I said quietly. "You gave me away." He pressed his hands to his face, breathing unevenly. "Is there any way you can forgive me?" "I already have," I said. "But forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I can forgive you for letting them turn you into something you're not. But I don't have to fund it again." He nodded slowly, absorbing it like medicine that burns on the way down. "What do we do now?" He whispered. "You rebuild," I said. "From zero. Like I did. Like your mother and I did. You work, you pay, you stop performing for people who wouldn't open their door to you if you didn't have a checkbook in your hand." He looked at me, a flicker of something new in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or finally understanding. "Dad, that night, at Christmas, when you stood up to them. I was angry, but I was also proud. I smiled faintly. Good. Maybe there's hope for you yet. He left quietly, closing the door behind him like he didn't want to disturb the peace. I poured a glass of bourbon and stepped out onto the porch. The desert air smelled like dust and renewal. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime played a broken tune that still sounded beautiful. I checked my phone. A message from my sister, Marisa. Dinner Sunday. The kids want to show you their new science projects, I typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Family, I thought, isn't blood that drains you. It's the people who want you there, even when you bring nothing but yourself. The bourbon tasted like freedom, and this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Spring arrived the way it does in New Mexico, sudden, unapologetic, as if the desert woke up overnight and decided green was worth the trouble. I started walking at dawn again, first around the block, then down to the arroyo and back. It's hard to carry old grudges when a roadrunner cuts across your path like a wind-up toy with a mission. One Saturday, I ran into Coach Ramirez at the hardware store. We'd coached rec league soccer together when our boys were 12, back when shin guards were too big, and dreams were even bigger. He clapped me on the shoulder and said he'd heard some noise around Christmas. People talk, he said, eyes kind. I told them they should talk less. I shrugged. They planted a story. He nodded, then leaned in like we were drawing plays on a whiteboard again. Then plant one back. But not a story, facts. I went home and wrote. Not a rant, a letter. Measured, documented, written like a builder's estimate. Scope, materials, timeline. I mailed it certified to the Albuquerque Journal with a simple cover note. I request a right of reply to the piece published December 22nd regarding my alleged abandonment of an elderly couple. Enclosed are primary source documents that materially contradict the narrative. I included the temperature log for that day, a printout of the flight arrival, copies of my transfers, the down payment withdrawal, the renovation receipts, a photo of the unlocked front door on Christmas Eve, not because it proved anything legal, but because it said everything about theater. A week later, my phone rang. Mr. Vega, this is Martin Sosa, managing editor. His voice had the careful weight of someone who has seen how fast ink can burn reputations. We've reviewed your documentation. We'll be running a correction and an addendum with your statement this Sunday. Not a retraction? I asked. Not quite, he said. But it will be clarifying. Sunday arrived with a front-page teaser. Further context on Sunport incident shows long-term financial support by accused man. Inside, a 2-column addendum ran beneath Paige Ellison's byline. It wasn't an apology, but the tone had shifted. Words like alleged and disputed. A paragraph summarizing my financial records. A quote from me about dignity. First sentence at the bottom. The Journal regrets not including Mr. Vega's perspective in the original piece. In our town, that counted as thunder. By Monday, the phone calls changed. Not from the Whitmores, I'd blocked them, but from people who'd read both versions and decided which one smelled like fresh-cut lumber and which smelled like cologne. A project manager I'd bid with in 2019 called to say he had a multi-family renovation I should look at. A church deacon asked if I could take a peek at their cracked steps. When you have time. Brother? An old client, Mrs. Ortega, left a voicemail that made my throat tight. Hector, I always knew you were the good kind. I didn't ask. I sharpened pencils and got back to work. It turns out peace and plywood pair well. Mid-March, Daniel came by again, squinting against the late afternoon light like he hadn't decided yet whether to step through the door. He looked cleaner around the edges, still tired, but carrying himself like a man who's begun to see cause and effect as more than a college concept. We put the house on the market, he said. We're going to take the loss and start over. Good, I said. Houses are like shoes. You can wear the wrong size out of pride, but your feet will tell the truth. He huffed a laugh. Sabrina's not handling it well. She's welcome to handle it however she wants, I said. You're the one who has to carry it. He looked down at his hands I recognized finally as mine. I got a job, he said. Project coordinator. Smaller salary, better people. Congratulations, he swallowed. They don't care where I eat or what I talk about at dinner. Then they're already richer than the ones who did. We sat on the porch steps. A neighbor's kid chalked crooked galaxies on the sidewalk, her tongue sticking out with concentration. The sun threw long gold spears across the street. Dad, he said, I joined a budgeting class. And a counseling group for adult kids who let their boundaries rot. Good, I said. Rot spreads. So does repair. Could you... He stopped to reset. Would you be willing to meet me once a week? Not to talk about money. Just coffee. A walk, something consistent? I didn't answer right away. I watched the chalk artist draw a star and then smudge it into a comet with her mitten. Thursday mornings, I said. Arroyo Trailhead, 6:30. Bring shoes that can get dusty. He smiled, small and honest. Yes, sir. That night I cooked for the first time in a long time. Not for a crowd, for me. Charid poblanos. Onions slow until sweet. A pot of beans Lucia would have approved of. When the house began to smell like the inside of our best memories, I set an extra plate anyway and poured a short bourbon. Some things you don't have to stop doing just because they hurt. Sometimes you do them because they heal. News travels fast in small cities and faster in small donor circles. 2 weeks after the journal's addendum, Charles Whitmore stepped back from the business association to focus on family matters. Catherine's name came off a gala invitation, replaced by a line about programmatic restructuring. Paige Ellison published a thoughtful column titled On Holiday Narratives and Who Gets to Tell Them, without mentioning names. It landed like rain on dust. I didn't celebrate any of it. I cleaned the shop. I hired a young apprentice named Matteo, whose handshake felt like a vow. I showed him how to square a frame without a laser level and how to talk to clients with more listening than words. He showed me how playlist apps worked. We called it even. April turned into May. Thursday coffees became a rhythm. Sometimes Daniel talked. Sometimes we just walked a loop and pointed out coyote tracks like two schoolboys cutting class in the good way. He didn't mention Sabrina much. When he did, the sentences were short and accurate, which is a kind way to speak about a marriage that's learning what it's made of. One Thursday, he arrived at the trailhead with 2 paper cups and a folded envelope. From me, he said, handing it over. First payment. I know it's a drop in the ocean. Inside, a check for $250 with repayment in the memo. I looked up. I know you said I don't owe you, he said quickly. And I know legally I probably don't. But for me, for the person I want to be, it matters to start making it right. 10 years monthly, more when I can. Keep it, I said, and watched his face fall before I added, for now, build an emergency fund. Pay your rent on time. Put food on your table that isn't charged to a stranger's dignity. When that's true for a year, hand me the next envelope and I'll cash it. Until then, we'll call your debt to me something else. What? He asked. A tuition payment, I said. For a class you shouldn't have to take twice. He blew out a long breath and nodded. Understood. We walked. The arroyo smelled like creosote and possibility. A hawk drew circles above us like it had nowhere else to be. On Mother's Day, Daniel knocked softly. He held a small bouquet of marigolds, the kind Lucia planted in coffee cans by our back door, and a photo I hadn't seen in years. The 3 of us at White Sands, all squint and teeth, Lucia's hair in a bandana, Daniel's nose sunburned beyond logic. I'm going to Mama Lucia's grave, he said. Would you come with me? We drove in silence to the cemetery. He knelt first, his shoulders shaking, and told his mother the truth at last. How he'd been cruel in polite clothes, how he'd chosen applause over family, how he wanted to start walking back. I waited. Then I told her about Thursday mornings and chalk comets and a young apprentice who reminded me of her nephew. If the dead can approve, I felt it in the way the wind stilled. June brought heat and a slow, steady pattern. Work, walks, beans simmering on Sundays. The Whitmores sold the house after 2 price drops and a quiet withdrawal of certain friends. Sabrina posted less. When she did, the captions were shorter and the filters were honest daylight. One afternoon, my doorbell rang. Catherine stood there alone, holding a rigid smile like a fragile plate. She asked to come in. I stepped onto the porch instead and let the screen door be a line neither of us needed to cross. I came to apologize, she said. The words sounded new in her mouth. For the choices we made. For the things I said. For the way we treated you as if hospitality were a favor bestowed downward. I studied her for a long moment. Why now? Because it's quieter, she said, surprising me. When it gets quiet, you hear the truth whether you want to or not. We stood with the sun at our backs like 2 actors at curtain call deciding whether to bow. I thought about Lucia's rule. If an apology costs the giver nothing, it's a tactic. If it costs them something, it's a start. What are you willing to pay? I asked. Her mouth trembled. We made a donation, she said, to the trade school scholarship fund in your wife's name. For apprentices, quietly, no plaques. I looked away so I wouldn't show more than I wanted. Thank you, I said finally. That will do more good than any headline. She nodded. We're moving to a smaller place. Charles says he'll fish more. She tried a laugh. It broke. We're learning to see the edges of things. We all are, I said. Can you forgive me? She asked. I already did, I said, and meant it. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting whose hands built your table. She took the correction without flinching. The first proof I'd seen that change had entered the house she lived in. We said goodbye like neighbors who had finally discovered they were human. That evening I cooked again. Calabacitas this time, corn bright as small suns, squash tender, the whole pan singing. I set 2 plates. Not because I expected a guest, but because the practice felt right. Like setting aside a chair for the part of yourself you almost lost but didn't. Later, when the sky did that impossible New Mexico thing, purple melting into pink into a last orange that refuses to be photographed, I sat on the porch with a notebook. I wrote down rules for whatever life I had coming. No funding what excludes you, no apologies delivered to closed doors. If you can't tell the story to the people you love, it isn't your story to live. Beans on Sundays. Walks on Thursdays. When someone says you don't fit their atmosphere, go where the air is yours. I closed the notebook. The wind chime found a tune. Somewhere a dog decided it had said enough for one night. The future didn't look dramatic. It looked like a long project with good bones. My favorite kind. By July, the desert baked under a white-hot sky, and the city slowed to a crawl. Even the wind felt like it came from an oven. I'd started taking my morning walks before sunrise, the kind of quiet hour when the world hasn't decided what kind of day it wants to be. Daniel had kept his word about our Thursday walks. We didn't talk about the past much anymore. That part had already been demolished, cleared, and carted off. Now we talked about framing, metaphorically and literally. He was learning construction the hard way, apprenticing on small commercial jobs. There was a sunburn across his neck that made him look like one of my crew from 20 years ago. He told me about his first real paycheck that hadn't come from an office, how the muscles in his hands ached in a way that made sleep taste better. I listened and smiled. Maybe that was what every father really wanted, not payback. Just proof that the lessons eventually took root. Dad, he said once, squinting at the horizon as the sun climbed, I think about everything that happened. About Mom, about Christmas. And it's weird, but I'm almost grateful now. For what? For the reckoning, he said. I didn't know who I was until I saw what I'd turned into. I nodded. Sometimes you have to lose your reflection before you notice the mirror's cracked. He laughed softly, the sound lighter than any apology. That summer, business boomed. The correction article had done more than clean my name. It put me back on the map. People liked stories of redemption, especially when it came with good craftsmanship. By August, I'd hired 3 new guys. Mateo had stepped up as foreman faster than I could have dreamed. His instinct for precision reminded me of myself at 30, when the world was still new and every beam I raised felt like part of a cathedral. One afternoon, he found me hunched over a blueprint, lost in thought. Boss, he said, I know this is none of my business, but you seem lighter lately, happier. I smiled. That's what happens when you stop bleeding money into people who mistake generosity for obligation. He chuckled, wiping dust from his hands. Guess peace of mind's the best investment, huh? Only one that always pays dividends. That night I sat outside with a glass of iced tea and thought about how quietly revenge had turned into something else. I hadn't set out to destroy the Whitmores. I'd only wanted justice. But the funny thing about justice is, when it's honest, it rarely looks like vengeance at all. It looks like balance, and balance had finally come home. The first letter arrived in late September. Thin envelope, expensive stationery. Handwritten, not typed. Hector, I've been thinking a lot about last Christmas, about the dinner, the guests, the humiliation. You were right. We deserved it. We built our lives on borrowed ground. We've sold the house, paid what debts we could, and moved back to Portland to be closer to family. For what it's worth, I wanted you to know we've started over too. Catherine is teaching again. I've taken up carpentry. Turns out working with your hands is humbling and healing. I understand a little better now what you built, not just with wood, but with patience. Thank you for holding up a mirror, Charles. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the same drawer where I kept Lucia's letters. Not because I forgave him entirely, but because he'd finally done something that cost him something. That night, I dreamed of Lucia. She was standing in our old kitchen, flour on her cheek, shaping dough the way she always did, and firm but kind. When I reached for her, she laughed and said, "Took you long enough to stop setting yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm." When I woke, the sunrise was red enough to look like a promise. By October, Daniel had rented a small 2-bedroom apartment near the university. He'd taken over a few small contracting jobs himself, and he called sometimes just to ask about materials, permits, bids, the language I knew best. Sabrina had left him in August. The separation was quiet, almost civilized. She'd gone back to her parents in Portland, though rumor had it her father's new simple life didn't involve much simple living. Daniel didn't talk about her often, and I didn't pry. But one morning, as we reached the end of our usual walking loop, he stopped by the arroyo and said, "You know, Dad, she told me once that she married me because I reminded her of her father. And now I hope someday she says she left me because I reminded her of you." I laughed then, really laughed. It felt good. The kind of laugh that breaks something tight inside and lets the air back in. "Careful," I said. "You might start sounding like a man with principles. I'm learning from the best." Thanksgiving came early that year, mid-November, the kind of dry, perfect day the desert gifts you like an apology for summer. Marisa hosted. Her house smelled like roasted chili and butter and forgiveness. Her grandchildren ran laps around the dining table while she yelled half-hearted threats about breaking the good plates. Daniel arrived with a pecan pie he'd baked himself, slightly burned on one edge, perfect on the other. When we all sat down, Marisa insisted I carve the turkey. I hesitated, then took the knife. The weight of it in my hand felt familiar, the same one I'd used for years, back when Christmas dinners meant something else. Daniel caught my eye from across the table. "You know," he said quietly, "this is the first holiday in a long time that actually feels like family." I nodded. "That's because nobody here is pretending." We ate, we laughed, and nobody mentioned the Whitmores or the past. For once, the silence between courses wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. When dessert came, I raised my glass, sweet tea instead of whiskey this time, and said, "To all the people who finally learned that peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the absence of debt." Everyone laughed, even the kids who didn't get it, and just like that, the ache in my chest and the one I'd mistaken for age started to fade. That night, back home, I sat in Lucia's old armchair. The house was dark except for the lamp beside me and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I thought about how much had changed in a single year and how much hadn't. Lucia's photo still sat on the mantel, her smile caught between mischief and mercy. Beneath it now was another picture, Daniel and me standing shoulder to shoulder at the trailhead, coffee cups in hand. His expression uncertain, mine steady. "But together," I whispered. "You'd be proud, you know." Took him a while, but he found his footing, if ghosts could smile. I swear she did. The porch light outside flickered once, then steadied, like a small nod from the universe. I leaned back, let the quiet settle, and realized something simple but solid. The story hadn't been about revenge. It had been about reclamation. About a man remembering his own worth after forgetting it in someone else's mortgage. And somewhere between ashes and forgiveness, I'd built something stronger than any house I'd ever raised. Myself. Winter came back soft that year, quiet mornings. Sun low and golden, the kind of light that turned even the dust in the air into something sacred. For the first time in a decade, I didn't dread the holidays. There were no expectations hanging over my head, no bills I couldn't pay, no phone vibrating with disguised demands. Just peace. I spent December the way a man rebuilds after a storm, slowly, carefully, laying each day like a brick. The week before Christmas, Daniel called while I was sanding a set of cedar shelves. "Dad, what are you doing next weekend?" "Nothing that can't wait," I said. "Good, because you're coming to dinner. At my place." "Don't argue." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Are you sure your oven works this time?" He laughed, the kind of laugh that carried no guilt anymore. "It will by then. I already tested it." So on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the night everything fell apart, I drove to his apartment, a modest 2-bedroom near the university with a crooked mailbox and no pretense. There were no $2,000 mixers on the counter, no glass chandelier hanging over a table, just the smell of roasted chicken, the sound of old ranchera music, and my son humming off-key as he mashed potatoes by hand. When he opened the door, flour streaked across his cheek. "Hey, old man," he said. I held up a bottle of wine. "You still eat, right?" He laughed and stepped aside. Inside, everything was warm in that imperfect way that means real. A thrift store table. A hand-me-down rug. Plates that didn't match. And yet somehow it was the most beautiful home I'd seen in years. He'd invited Marissa and her family. The kids ran between the kitchen and the living room, shouting about some board game I didn't understand. Daniel's dog, a mutt with mismatched eyes, slept by the couch, snoring softly. When we sat down to eat, Daniel cleared his throat. "Before we start," he said, "I want to say something." Everyone went quiet. He looked straight at me. "Last year I threw away something priceless. I thought comfort and appearances were worth more than respect. I was wrong, Dad. Thank you for letting me lose everything so I could see what really mattered." Marissa reached over and squeezed his hand. I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat wouldn't let me. Finally I said, "Son, we all make bad trades in this life. The lucky ones get a second chance to correct the math." Dinner began. The food wasn't fancy, but it was honest, just like the people eating it. Every bite tasted like forgiveness cooked low and slow. At some point, Daniel asked if I wanted to say grace. I hadn't done that in years, but the words came easy. "For full plates," I said, "and empty grudges. For roofs we can afford and people who stay when the lights go out. Amen." Later, after the dishes were washed and the kids were fighting over cookies, Daniel handed me a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. "Don't worry," he said. "It's not expensive." Inside was a simple wooden ornament, hand-carved. It was the shape of a small house with a single word burned into the bottom, "Home." I turned it in my hand. The edges were rough, uneven, the kind of thing that takes time and patience to learn. "You made this?" I asked. He nodded. "First project I finished, start to finish." "Thought you might hang it on your tree." I smiled. "You know, when you were little, you used to tell your mom you'd build us a big house someday." "I guess you finally did." "Just took a few detours." He laughed softly. "Yeah, guess I needed to tear down the wrong one first." The next morning I woke before sunrise. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that makes you pull your robe tighter but keeps you smiling. I made coffee, turned on the small radio Lucia used to love, and sat by the window watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. No gifts under the tree, no noise, no drama. Just the faint sound of a world that for once didn't need fixing. I looked at the ornament Daniel had made. It hung from the lowest branch of my modest tree, catching the early light. Home, not a place. Not a house, not even a person. A balance, a choice. I thought about everything that had happened, the rejection, the humiliation, the fire, the silence, the rebuilding. And I realized something simple, something Lucia had probably known all along. Home isn't where you live. It's where you stop apologizing for existing. A week later, I got a call from the local community college. A woman named Ruth, who ran the vocational training center, asked if I'd consider guest teaching a short course on practical carpentry and business ethics. "We're trying to give our students more than just the tools," she said. "We want them to understand integrity." I laughed. "You sure you want me?" "My idea of business ethics involves not paying for other people's Christmas trees." She laughed too. "Exactly. That's why I think they need you." So I said yes. The first day I walked into that classroom, 15 students, half my age, all hungry to build something real, I felt something click back into place. I told them what no one had told me when I was young. Every board you cut wrong can be fixed. Every mistake costs time, not your soul. But if you start believing other people's worth is higher than yours, you'll start cutting corners that never grow back. They wrote that one down. By spring, Daniel had joined me in the business part-time. Not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. We'd meet at job sites, drink coffee from paper cups, argue about paint colors and flooring choices. I'd watch him talk to clients, respectful, patient, And every time he said sir or ma'am, I heard a little echo of myself. One afternoon, as we packed up the truck, he said, "Dad, do you ever miss Mom?" "Every day," I said, "but it hurts less when I realize I'm still building the life she wanted for us." He smiled. "She'd be proud. I think she already is." That summer, we built a gazebo for the community center. The whole neighborhood showed up to help. Kids painted the benches. Old ladies brought lemonade. Someone played guitar under the shade, while Mateo showed the younger volunteers how to measure twice, cut once. When it was finished, they asked me to say a few words. I looked around at the people, neighbors, students, my son, my sister, and thought about how much of my life I'd spent trying to earn belonging from people who didn't even understand the word. I cleared my throat. "You know," I said, "I used to think home was something you bought. 4 walls, a roof, some nice furniture. Turns out it's something you build. And the trick isn't money. It's care. It's respect. It's showing up even when you're not invited." They clapped, but I wasn't talking for applause. I was talking for the man I used to be, the one who thought generosity had to come with humiliation. That night, when everyone left, I sat alone in the gazebo. The desert wind moved softly through the beams, making the structure hum. I could almost hear Lucia whispering, "Now it's solid." I smiled, leaned back on the bench and let the quiet settle. Years from now, people might forget the Whitmores, the article, the scandal, the drama. That's fine. What I hope they remember is that sometimes strength doesn't look like revenge. It looks like restraint. It looks like a man choosing peace over pride, love over bitterness, truth over image, and if I ever forget, I'll look at that little wooden ornament hanging by my window, the one that says home. Because now, finally, I'm there. The following year unfolded in a kind of quiet rhythm that I hadn't known since Lucia was alive. Days were simple, predictable even, but they were mine. Mornings began with the sound of my old coffee maker sputtering awake, the scent of roasted beans cutting through the cool desert air. I'd stand on the porch while the sun crept up over the sandias, painting the sky in dusty pink and gold. No phone calls demanding money. No letters filled with pity or deceit. Just light, spreading slow and steady. Daniel and I had built something better than forgiveness, consistency. Every Thursday, like clockwork, we met for coffee before work. He'd always arrive first, 2 cups in hand, pretending the habit was his idea. "Black, no sugar," he'd say, handing me one. "Still bitter?" "Still cheaper than therapy," I'd reply. He'd grin. "You sure?" "Because I've been told I need a lot of therapy." "Then buy the next round," I'd say, and somehow that became our ritual. Small jokes, bigger truths, both of us learning that rebuilding wasn't one grand moment of redemption. It was 1,000 tiny choices not to repeat the same mistake. By late spring, my life had settled into a kind of rhythm. Mornings on job sites, afternoons teaching at the vocational program, evenings in my quiet kitchen cooking meals that reminded me who I was. The class had grown from 15 to nearly 40 students. Some were kids barely out of high school. Others were men and women older than I was when I started. People who'd been burned by life and wanted to learn something solid, something they could hold in their hands. I taught them the same way I'd raised my son, firm, but fair. On the last day of class that semester, one of the students, a woman named Teresa, came up to me as I was cleaning up scrap wood from the floor. "Mr. Vega," she said, "you don't talk like a teacher. You talk like somebody who's been hurt and got over it." I smiled. "That's because I don't teach carpentry," I said. "I teach recovery. The wood's just the medium." She laughed, but then her expression softened. "It helped me, you know. Being here, building something. I was scared to start over after my divorce. You make it look possible." "It is possible," I said. "You just have to stop waiting for people to hand you permission." She nodded, eyes glassy. "Thank you." When she left, I stood alone in the quiet workshop, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of pine. Lucia used to say that sawdust was proof you'd made progress, even if it was messy. Maybe she was right. That summer, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a trip not far, just to Taos. I rented a small cabin near the Rio Grande Gorge. The place had no Wi-Fi, no TV, and no expectations. I spent the mornings hiking, the afternoons sketching ideas for new projects, and the evenings staring into a fire until the stars took over the sky. It wasn't peace at first. Peace is noisy when you're not used to it. It presses against you, reminding you of all the quiet you ran from. But after the second day, the noise faded. I realized I didn't miss anything or anyone. I just missed moments. Moments I'd rushed through before because I thought productivity meant purpose. One night, sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, I caught myself whispering, "Lucia, I think I'm finally getting it." The wind didn't answer, but a shooting star crossed the sky like punctuation. I took it as approval. Back home, the business kept growing. Daniel had officially joined me full-time. We renamed it Vega & Son Construction. I didn't want the "and Son" at first. It felt like tempting fate. But Daniel insisted. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about what you built and what you passed down." We had our first joint project that fall, rebuilding a historic adobe church on the south side. It was the kind of work that demanded patience, hand-mixing mud plaster, replacing beams one by one, honoring what was already there instead of trying to modernize it. One afternoon, as we worked under the hot sun, Daniel looked up from a cracked beam he was sanding. "You ever think about how everything we fix was once built by somebody else's hands?" "All the time," I said. "It's why I'm careful," he nodded slowly. "Makes you realize legacy isn't about what you own. It's what stays standing when you're gone." I smiled. "Now you sound like your mother." He grinned, a little sheepish. "Guess you were both good teachers." We worked in silence after that, each stroke of the sander another small prayer to the people who came before. By winter, the church was finished. They held a rededication ceremony in early December, and the priest, an old friend of mine, insisted that Daniel and I sit in the front row. When they unveiled the plaque that read "Restored with Care and Integrity by Vega & Son Construction," I felt something in my chest loosen. After the ceremony, as people filtered out, Daniel stayed behind. He ran his hand along the smooth wall, the surface gleaming under soft light. "You realize," he said, "this is the first Christmas I've been proud of myself in a long time." "You earned that," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, but I wouldn't have without you." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't need me to teach you carpentry. You needed me to stop saving you. Turns out that's what made you a man." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes wet. "Then maybe that was the best thing you ever built." That night I went home and pulled out an old box I hadn't touched since Lucia passed. Inside were photos, notes, her recipes written in her looping handwriting. At the very bottom, folded neatly, was the apron she used to wear when she baked at Christmas. I lifted it out and pressed it to my chest. It still smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap. "I did it, Luce," I whispered. "Took me a while, but I did it." I hung the apron by the kitchen window, right where it caught the first light every morning. It wasn't grief anymore. It was gratitude. On Christmas Eve, Daniel and I went to the church. We didn't plan to, it just felt right. The air was cold and sharp, stars scattered across a black sky. Inside, candles flickered along the aisle. The scent of cedar and wax filled the air. We sat in silence for a while, both of us staring at the altar we'd helped rebuild. Then Daniel said quietly, "I'm glad you didn't give up on me, Dad." I smiled. "You made it easy when you finally stopped fighting the lesson." He laughed. "I was stubborn. You were human," I said. "That's worse," we both chuckled. The church bells chimed midnight. Daniel turned to me. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Merry Christmas, son." As we walked outside, snow started to fall, a rare blessing in the desert. Soft flakes, slow and quiet. Daniel tilted his head back and grinned like a boy again. I watched him, my son, my second chance, and thought, this is what justice really looks like, not the kind you take. The kind you live long enough to see become peace. That night back home I sat by the window, the world blanketed in silver. The little wooden ornament, home, hung on the tree, catching the reflection of the falling snow. I raised my glass, not in toast, but in thanks, for storms that pass, for suns who return, for endings that turn into beginnings, and for the quiet, steady truth that when you stop paying for other people's peace, you finally find your own. By the time the next summer rolled around, Vega & Son Construction had become something more than a business. It was a community. We didn't advertise much, never needed to. Word of mouth in Albuquerque spreads faster than wildfire when you do good work and show up on time. Clients came not just for craftsmanship, but because they trusted us. They knew that when we said something was solid, it meant it could weather time, storms, and bad luck. Sometimes, when I stood at a job site watching Daniel explain a design to a client, I'd catch a glimpse of the boy he'd been, the one who used to run around my legs with a toy hammer, saying he'd build the biggest house in the world. Now he built differently. Smaller houses, humbler ones, but every nail was driven with purpose, and that I realized mattered more than scale. That September I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Paige Ellison, the journalist who'd written the original smear piece years before. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate. Mr. Vega, I've carried guilt for some time over that story. It was careless and partial. I believed the Whitmores because their version sounded polished, familiar, like so many others I'd heard. But I've since learned that sometimes the truth doesn't wear clean shoes. Your case taught me to ask better questions. I wanted you to know that I resigned from the lifestyle column and now run a local features desk. We focus on stories of working people who rebuild, not just rise. I'd like to interview you for a piece on second chances, if you'll allow it. Respectfully, Paige Ellison. I stared at the letter for a long time. The old part of me wanted to crumple it up and toss it into the bin, to let the past stay buried. But another part, the quieter one, knew that growth means allowing others to change too. So I said yes. We met at a cafe downtown, the kind where the tables still wobble and the coffee tastes like it's been loved too long by the pot. She arrived early, notebook in hand, her expression cautious but sincere. "Mr. Vega," she began, "thank you for meeting me." "Just Hector," I said, smiling faintly. "And you don't have to apologize again. You already did in ink." She smiled, relieved. "Still, it feels right to say it in person. You were decent to let me tell the story again." I nodded. "Everyone deserves a second draft. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Not about revenge or scandal or money, but about dignity. About rebuilding trust and finding peace after being wronged." When she asked what I'd learned, I said that sometimes the best way to win is to stop playing the game. Let people keep their gossip. You keep your grace. She wrote that down. Later, when the article came out, the title read, "Hector Vega, the man who built peace." It wasn't dramatic, just honest. And for the first time, when people recognized me at the grocery store, they didn't whisper. They nodded. The following month, Daniel surprised me with something that almost knocked me off my feet. We'd just finished restoring an old barn in Corrales, a long week of hauling, hammering, sweating under the desert sun. As we packed the truck, he handed me a small envelope. "Don't open it until you're home," he said. When I did, I found a set of printed documents. Property transfer papers. At the top, Vega Community Workshop. He'd purchased the old warehouse next to our office and filed the deed jointly in our names. Inside was a note in Daniel's handwriting. "You taught me how to build walls, right? Now I want to teach others how to build bridges. Let's open a space where kids can learn carpentry, design, and self-respect. No tuition, just mentorship." "Your move, old man." I sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that only comes when your heart is too full to keep pace with your thoughts. Lucia would have cried. I did too. The workshop opened that fall. We started small, 6 teens from the neighborhood, 1 donated table saw, 2 sets of tools, and enough wood to keep them busy. On the first day, I stood in front of them and said, "This isn't just about cutting boards. It's about learning to build without breaking yourselves." One kid raised his hand. "So, it's like life lessons?" I smiled. "Exactly, except you get to take home a bookshelf when you're done." They laughed. By the end of the first month, every student had built something of their own. Small things, stools, birdhouses, picture frames. But the pride on their faces could have lit the entire block. That's when I understood what Lucia had been trying to tell me all those years ago, that giving isn't weakness. It's only weakness when you give to people who refuse to grow, give to those who plant. Then it becomes legacy. The day after our first student showcase, I visited Lucia's grave. I brought marigolds, her favorite, and a photo of the new workshop with the kids smiling wide and covered in sawdust. "See this?" I said softly. "You always said I'd find a way to keep building after you. Took me a while, but I got there." A warm breeze stirred the petals, lifting them just enough to brush against my hand. I took that as her answer. That Christmas, the workshop hosted a neighborhood dinner. Not fancy. Paper plates, folding tables, tamales, and homemade cookies. Everyone brought something. Daniel grilled. Mateo DJ'd badly. The kids decorated the space with wood ornaments and garlands made from scrap pine. Halfway through the night, Daniel clinked his glass and called for quiet. "Dad," he said, "last year I gave you an ornament that said home. But this year, I wanted to add something." He reached into his jacket and handed me a small wooden plaque. Carved into it were the words, "Home is the place you help others build." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat had locked around the weight of it. He grinned, his eyes wet. "So, Merry Christmas, old man. You built more homes than you'll ever live in." Everyone clapped, even though most of them didn't know the whole story. But I did, and that was enough. Later that night, after the tables were cleared and the lights dimmed, I sat alone in the workshop. The air smelled of wood, smoke, and laughter. Outside, the desert wind moved softly through the rafters. I ran my fingers across the plaque again and whispered, "Thank you, Lucia, for the love that outlasted everything." Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped out into the cool night. Above me, the stars burned steady and bright, like nails hammered into the ceiling of the world by a hand far more patient than mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. I just felt finished. The new year crept in quietly, without fireworks or fanfare. Just a soft hum of life continuing, students returning to the workshop, orders coming in steady, Daniel making coffee before I even unlocked the door. There was something comforting about that rhythm, not glamorous, but real. For a long time, I'd chased the kind of success that sparkled. A bigger house, better clients, recognition that made people nod when they said your name. But this kind of success, measured in steady hearts and calloused hands, was richer. The Vega Community Workshop became something bigger than we'd planned. By February, word had spread across the South Valley. We got calls from teachers, youth counselors, even parole officers. They wanted to send kids our way, not because we were saints, but because we offered what school couldn't always give: a place to fail safely, to build something useful, to feel pride without price tags. One Saturday, a tall, quiet kid named Andre showed up late. Hoodie pulled low. Wouldn't meet my eye. "You ever held a hammer?" I asked. He shrugged. "Once, didn't go great." I handed him one anyway. "Then today it goes better." It didn't. He bent nails, split boards, dropped the hammer twice, but he kept showing up. And by the 5th class, he built a birdhouse that didn't fall apart when he lifted it. When I told him it was solid work, he smiled for the first time. Small, unsure, but real. "Guess I'm not completely useless," he said. I looked him dead in the eye. "Son, I've seen useless people. They don't bother coming back after failure." He nodded, holding that birdhouse like it was made of gold. That moment reminded me of Daniel at 17, standing in my driveway after crashing his mom's car. The same guilt, the same uncertainty, the same need to hear that redemption was possible. Maybe that's what all of this was really about, giving others the second chance I once had to claw my way toward. In March, the workshop was invited to partner with the local high school for a mentorship program. I gave my first formal speech in years. It wasn't elegant, I've never been a fancy talker, but it was honest. "You don't need to be the smartest in the room," I told them. "Just the most willing to learn. Measure twice, cut once, not just for wood, but for people. Think before you react. Check your angles. Don't rush the work. Because life's the same, and you cut too fast, and you'll spend twice as long fixing what you broke." The kids clapped, but I could tell they understood. Not because the words were wise, but because they were real. After the speech, one of the teachers came up and said, "Mr. Vega, your story, it's the kind that sticks." I smiled. "Then I hope it sticks in the right places." April brought another surprise. The Albuquerque Journal ran a follow-up piece on the Vega workshop. The same paper that once painted me as a villain now called our work a model for restorative mentorship. There was a photo of Daniel and me standing in front of the sign, sawdust on our sleeves, both of us laughing at something Mateo had said off-camera. The caption read, "From Scandal to Sanctuary, a father and son rebuild more than walls." I tore the article out and pinned it to the bulletin board in the workshop, not as a trophy, but as proof that sometimes the world can correct itself if you give it time. That summer, Daniel asked a question I hadn't expected. We were repairing a roof together when he said, "Dad, what do you think about me getting remarried someday?" I froze mid-measure. "Well," I said slowly, I think you should wait until you're with someone who'd still love you if the house burned down. He laughed. That's a high bar. That's the only bar that matters. He nodded thoughtfully. I met someone. Not rushing it. She works at the vocational center. Teaches design. Does she make you a better man or a busier one? He smiled. Both, I think. Good, I said. Then you're learning balance. Lucia used to say love was a craft. You shape it, sand it, oil it. And sometimes you have to tear it apart and start over. But when done right, it lasts longer than anything money can buy. By fall, the workshop had grown too small for all the students. We needed more space. Daniel and I spent evenings sketching out expansion plans, an extra bay for machines, another classroom for design, maybe even a small scholarship fund. When the city granted us a permit, I took a moment to stand outside the building at dusk. The air smelled like cedar and paint, that sweet scent of progress. Across the street, Andre, now our unofficial assistant, was locking up the tool shed. He waved. See you tomorrow, Mr. Vega. See you tomorrow, I said, and meant it in every possible way. That winter, for the first time, I didn't visit Lucia's grave alone. Daniel came with me, and so did the students. Each brought something they'd built that year, a frame, a shelf, a carving. We laid them around her gravestone like offerings, not of grief, but of growth. Daniel placed a small cedar cross on top and whispered, You'd have loved this, Mom. I felt her presence in the wind again. The way it brushed against the collar of my jacket, warm, approving. I turned to the group. Lucia believed that when you build something with care, it remembers you, even after you're gone. The kids nodded, some looking shy, others proud. Andre raised his hand. So, you think when we build stuff here, it remembers us too? I smiled. It already does. That night I walked home slower than usual. The streets glowed with Christmas lights, soft and calm. In my living room, the little wooden ornament that said home still hung on the same branch, though the tree had gotten smaller with age, like me. I sat in my chair sipping hot tea and thought about how far we'd come, from debt and betrayal to peace and purpose, and I realized something new. Forgiveness isn't a finish line. It's maintenance. You keep checking the foundation. You patch the leaks before they spread. You choose kindness over pride every single day. That's the real craftsmanship, not in the wood, but in the heart. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint scent of rain, rare and cleansing. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered into the quiet. Thank you, Lucia, for teaching me how to rebuild, for giving me a son worth the work. The clock ticked softly. The house creaked in all its familiar ways, and the peace that filled the room wasn't the loud, triumphant kind. It was steady, honest. The kind you build board by board, mistake by mistake, until one day you realize you're living inside the home you were always meant to make. The years that followed felt like a long, slow sunrise. Quiet at first, then brighter with every passing season. Time didn't erase what happened. It just softened it. Smoothed the edges until what used to be pain became part of the grain, a story within the wood that gave everything else its strength. The Vega Community Workshop grew into something far beyond my imagination. We partnered with local charities, schools, and shelters. Every week people came through those old metal doors, carrying their own kinds of brokenness, a lost job, a failed marriage, a dream that never got built, and walked out carrying something they made with their own two hands. Tables, chairs, picture frames, a little confidence. Sometimes the smallest creations hold the most healing. One morning, while I was repairing a cracked table leg, a familiar voice came from behind me. Still working the miracles, old man? I turned around. It was Michael Whitmore. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the night his family imploded under their own arrogance. He looked smaller somehow. Not just older, humbled. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a worn jacket. In his hands he held a folded newspaper. Daniel told me you might be here, he said quietly. I put down my tools. Took you a while, he nodded. I deserved the wait. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he unfolded the newspaper and set it on my workbench. It was an article about our mentorship program, with a photo of me and Daniel smiling under the workshop sign. You built something good, he said. Something real. I built it from the wreckage, I said evenly. He looked down. I came to apologize. For everything. For what we said. For what we printed. For how I let pride ruin a family. I studied his face. Older, softer, stripped of all the superiority that once coated every word he spoke. "Do you still live in Spokane?" I asked. He shook his head. "Sold the house before the bank took it. Moved back to Portland. I work for a contractor now." That made me smile despite myself. "A contractor?" "Yeah, turns out swinging a hammer for someone else is good for the soul." I nodded. "It is," he hesitated. Hector, I don't expect forgiveness. I already gave it," I said. "You just weren't ready to receive it yet." He blinked hard, eyes shining. "You'd still say that after everything?" I sighed. "You know what's funny about forgiveness? It's not really for the other person. It's for the one who refuses to let anger become their home." He smiled faintly. "I think I understand that now." "Good," I said, picking up my sandpaper again. "Then maybe you'll build something worth keeping this time." He left a few minutes later, but as he walked out into the sunlight, I noticed his shoulders were lighter, like a man who'd finally set down a weight he'd carried too long. That evening, Daniel stopped by with his fiancée, Sophia, the design teacher from the vocational center. She was everything Isabella wasn't, grounded, kind, with a laugh that made the whole room feel brighter. "Dad," Daniel said, "we're getting married in June. Small ceremony. We'd like to have it here and in the workshop." I laughed. "Here among the sawdust and toolboxes." "Exactly here," Sophia said. "This place is where Daniel became who he is. It feels right." I looked around the room, the same walls that had seen failure, forgiveness, and rebuilding. "Then it's perfect," I said. The wedding day came with sun and wind and the smell of cedar in the air. The whole community showed up. Students, neighbors, even Paige, the journalist, with her camera crew to document a love story built on restoration. We swept the floors, strung up lights, and covered the tables with white linen. The old tools gleamed like relics of another time. When Daniel and Sophia exchanged vows beneath the arch we'd built from reclaimed wood, I felt Lucia's presence as real as the light around us. Maybe she'd been guiding me here all along, from the ashes of bitterness to this moment of grace. After the ceremony, Daniel raised his glass. "To my father," he said. "The man who taught me that strength isn't in building walls but in opening doors. You showed me how to rebuild a life, one honest cut at a time." Everyone applauded. I tried to speak but couldn't. The lump in my throat refused to budge. Instead, I simply lifted my glass back and said, "To second chances, may we never waste them." Months passed. Seasons turned. The workshop expanded into 2 buildings. The mentorship program became a small non-profit. Daniel and Sophia ran it together, and I took on a quieter role. Part-time teacher, full-time observer. Some evenings I'd stay late, sweeping sawdust from the floor, while the last light faded through the windows. The sound of laughter, the rhythm of hammers, the smell of pine, they all blended into something sacred. Sometimes Andre would stop by after work, just to talk. He'd gotten an apprenticeship with a local carpenter. "Didn't think I'd ever make something people wanted," he told me once. "You proved me wrong." "Didn't prove you wrong," I said. "Just gave you tools to prove yourself right." Years later, long after Daniel and Sophia's second child was born, I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and rose. My hands had grown slower, my knuckles thicker. But the peace inside me was light. A familiar ornament still hung by the window, the little wooden house Daniel had carved all those years ago. Next to it was a new one carved by his daughter. Tiny hands, wobbly edges, a heart burned into the center. She'd handed it to me last Christmas and said, "Grandpa, I made you a home in a heart." And she had. I don't travel much anymore. The workshop runs fine without me. But sometimes I wander in, coffee in hand, pretending to check the shelves. Daniel always catches me. "Dad," he says, smiling, "you don't have to supervise. You built this, and I always answer the same way. Yeah, but I like seeing it still standing. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Life will test every beam, every joint, every nail you've ever placed. Some people will tear down what you build. Some will forget to thank you. Some will shut the door in your face at Christmas. But if you keep building anyway, if you keep choosing patience over pride and honesty over resentment, you'll wake up one day to find yourself living in a home no storm can touch. Because real peace isn't found in wealth, or titles or applause. It's found in the quiet satisfaction of having built something that outlives you. Love, integrity, forgiveness. The true foundations of a life well lived. That night, as I turned off the porch light, I whispered one last time into the still air, "Lucia." We did it. The wind moved through the trees, soft and sure, like her hand brushing my shoulder, and just like that, I knew everything I'd lost, everything I'd built, everything I'd learned and had brought me home.